G'day mate, 40 here. So we're not hearing much about stochastic terrorism with these two assassination attempts on Donald Trump. So stochastic terrorism means that terrorism that is inspired by rhetoric but cannot be directly linked or predicted. That violent speech just creates an unstable environment where inevitably people will react in a terrorist fashion. So, two assassination attempts on Donald Trump, you'd think that you'd be breaking out the phrase stochastic terrorism, given that the latest would-be assassin of Donald Trump echoes so much of Democratic rhetoric and news media rhetoric about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy. So, just as many observers completely changed the way they talked about the alt-right when the alt-right started slaughtering people after Charlottesville, attacking mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and a Walmart in southern Texas, right? When a group that was previously just a bunch of merry pranksters starts slaughtering people, it changes how you talk about the group and how you analyze its rhetoric. Well, so too, perhaps it's time to start analyzing media rhetoric and Democratic Party rhetoric about Donald Trump and whatever connection it may have with regard to these two assassination attempts on Donald Trump. And if democracy is on the ballot, then shooting the candidate for a major party who stands at least a 50% chance of being the next president of the United States, it strikes me as an attack on democracy. So, hilarious media tropes with regard to the Middle East always crack me up. One trope is nobody wants to see a wider war. Nobody wants to see an escalation of violence in the Middle East. But it's nonsense. They've been saying for these 6 months, there is good reason to believe that Israel would welcome a major escalation of violence in the Middle East. And it's also clear that Hezbollah and Iran really don't want an escalation of violence. So Israel is held back from escalating its war with Hezbollah by American pressure. Right, Biden has put his foot on Bibi Netanyahu's neck since October of last year, right, slowing down and limiting Israel's attempts to defend itself and essentially allowing Hezbollah to force 60,000, 80,000 Israelis from the north to move inland to forcibly shrink the effective size of the Jewish state. And Biden has essentially signed off on that. Well, this pager attack is hilarious in Lebanon, right? So 3,000 members of Hezbollah might find that their pages go off with an explosion. And so thousands of these would-be rapists, right? They have to deal with an exploding pager that frequently damages, if not removes, the instrument by which they were planning to carry out mass rapes of Israeli women. Talk about a pinpoint strike overwhelmingly taking out Hezbollah terrorists. It was brilliant. I mean, Israel is mounting brilliant operation after brilliant operation with regard to its enemies in Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran. And even though I'm a convert to Orthodox Judaism and committed Zionist, I've not been a rah-rah, isn't Israel great analyst of the Middle East. And I recognize that Israel makes a ton of mistakes, and there's a definite change, however, with regard to Israel's lethality. And we keep seeing indication after indication about how much Israel wants to escalate. And now we see it's clear that Israel is determined to escalate the war with Hezbollah until its citizens can return to live in the north of Israel in peace. And for all of Iran and Hezbollah's tough talk, right, Israel is 15 steps ahead of them. And you know that Israel is mapping all these people who've been injured and all their trips to the emergency room, right? Thousands of people going to the emergency room because their Hezbollah terrorist pager has gone off. It also shows you the effect of IQ, right? The average IQ of a Hezbollah soldier is probably not even 90. Well, the average IQ of an Israeli soldier is well above 100. So there's at least a standard and a half IQ distinction between Hezbollah fighters and Israeli fighters, which places Hezbollah at great peril because stupid people do stupid things, and creates all these opportunities for Israel to be so effective because they're just simply sharper, smarter, faster, more technologically advanced than Hezbollah. Oh yeah, we saw an August 28 phone call to the police department in Springfield, Ohio, complaining about a cat that had been dismembered and prepared for eating. So how much you want to bet is there's increased scrutiny of Springfield, Ohio. We won't find out about more and more horrible behavior on the part of Haitian immigrants, in addition to perhaps sterling behavior, which may well outweigh the horrendous behavior. We'll have to wait and see. Well, there is definitely one side in the Middle East who would welcome a wider war, even though the New York Times, the other elite media, keeps telling me nobody wants an escalation. Well, Israel definitely wants an escalation, and it would be delicious if it happened prior to the American election, because if Donald Trump is elected, Israel is effectively going to have a blank check to deal with its enemies as it sees fit. While if Kamala Harris is elected, she'll be the most likely Israel-critical president we've ever had. So Kamala Harris was a typical incoherent self when she was interviewed today at the National Association of Black Journalists. A bunch of word salad, highly unimpressive. So not just insecurity, I think, showing through on Kamala Harris's part, but likely just sloppy thinking. Right, Kamala's not even the smartest of her siblings, right? Kamala went to a historical black college, then went to an affirmative action, got into a low-tier law school through affirmative action, and then failed the California bar. So talking about someone probably with an IQ about 120. So it may not just be her insecurity that shows through, but the intellectual emptiness that shines through under pressure, and even not under pressure. Maybe there's just no there with Kamala Harris, if she ever goes beyond simply reading from a script and doing what people much smarter and more capable than her are directing. So she has the most brilliant campaign team ever to place her in a position where she has approximately a 40 to 50% chance of winning the presidency. The job that they are doing with such mediocre material is amazing. Then this is the other media trope that I'm waiting for with regard to Middle East. Israel pulls off a stunning attack against Hezbollah, but shockingly, this won't end all of Israel's problems in the Middle East, as though any one event would ever end all of Israel's problems in the Middle East. But I see this trope again and again when Israel has some stunning, audacious success that people could never have predicted. I mean, could you have predicted that approximately 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists would get blown up by their own pages? I was not expecting that. Right, I was not expecting this whole string of Israeli successes against their enemies taking place in Iran, pinpointing Hezbollah leaders and taking them out. And then afterwards, there are all these New York Times articles. Despite XYZ stunning success, that's not going to represent the end of all of Israel's problems. Who could imagine that one stunning success is not going to end all our problems?
We're going to have a baby, it's going to be my baby, right? He's wearing a kippah. You don't look Jewish, you look Asian.
I'm 1/16. You're very sharp.
Well, I'm of the original side of your brain. There's been constantly changed the calendar to the Sabbath.
So,
Jews fled Ireland.
so this woman says, I don't look, this guy's wearing a kippah, but he doesn't look Jewish, he looks Asian. Okay, now she's screaming at me about the history of Judaism and Jews moving to Ireland. Good times here in Westwood. Wow, she's still screaming. So I guess people can look at my production as people have looked at my online productions as the equivalent of a street person screaming into the void. Yeah, that's a fairly common critique that I've received. Street person screaming into the void. That's what you are, mate. So I'm going to be shocked when the mainstream media lets me know that this stunning, audacious success in Lebanon against thousands of Hezbollah terrorists carrying pages does not mark the end of all of Israel's problems. Hey, have you ever played that delightful par 3, hole number 5 at the Trump International Golf Course? I mean, that par 3 there, hole number 5, is just stunning, and it's so enjoyable just so long as there's not an assassin waiting to take you out, right? I can't wait to see that Aaron Hernandez American sports story. Okay, I sure hope that's good. I watched the 4-part Netflix documentary on Aaron Hernandez. So he's the brain damage, CTE suffering New England Patriots star tight end who killed some people and played a role in the killing of other people. So it was simultaneously a professional football player and carrying out hits on the side. Thinking about all those Hezbollah terrorists, this makes me reflect, you really want to keep your distance from terrorists. All right, so a tiny number apparently of innocent people who also got hurt, but I think it's a good idea in general to keep your distance away from people who are explosive. Keep your distance from bad people, keep your distance from dangerous people. And if you allow a terrorist to, or the criminally inclined or the mentally ill, or just simply those who love to stoke unnecessary drama, right? You allow them into your life, right? You're going to pay a stiff price. And maybe it's just not worth it. I mean, imagine how the wives and the children and the friends who are not part of Hezbollah, how they reacted when their friend, their father, their brother was in Hezbollah, right? Had his pager blow up. So tens of thousands of Lebanese are going to have their lives turned upside down if Hezbollah launches a wider war. And Israel is just dying to invade southern Lebanon. So America just yesterday warned Israel against invading southern Lebanon. That's so funny. They warned Israel yesterday against invading southern Lebanon. Says it's a bad idea, just allow the peace process to work out. So we're coming up on a year now that about 70,000 Israelis in the north have had to flee their homes. But just allow the peace process to work. Anytime we're going to get a handle on things. And like what Bibi Netanyahu said, we're going to do whatever we need to do to protect our people. And you know that Israel is just itching for a wider war with Hezbollah. Right? Last time Hezbollah lined up a bunch of missiles to tackle Tel Aviv, the IDF, Israeli Air Force, just took them all out as soon as they got on the launch pad. And you know that Israel is graphing. All of these people are going to Lebanese hospitals with wounds, and then everyone who's connected to them. And they're going to be following and infiltrating all the new ways that Hezbollah uses to try to communicate. So a few months ago, Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, said we've got to stop using cell phones. We want you to use these new pages. So one report says they came from Taiwan. And that hasn't worked out too well for Hezbollah. So I have a sense that Hezbollah is not going to be quite the lethal fighting force that we were told that this sub-90 IQ force was posing for Israel. Okay, let's catch up with the chat, mate. There are Haitians eating cats on my street, bro. Is someone following you? What time is it? Can you see my messages? Siren Soldier, yes. I see palm trees. I'm guessing you're somewhere the West Coast. Okay, so it is 4:03 p.m. in Los Angeles. I am in Westwood right now. The bro has a PhD in yapology. Bro, I took notes. This is high quality, concentrated content. Rent that scooter. No, this is crazy how many people rent scooters and then don't use a helmet. So in some ways now is better, right? When I was riding bikes when I was a kid, almost no one wore a helmet. That's crazy. Right? Taking more care, right, with protecting your brain is one way that life today is better than it was when I was a kid. So when I go to the Venice Beach, right, most of the people on rollerblades, on scooters, on bikes, right, they're not even wearing helmets. It's crazy. I mean, just think of the low morale in Hezbollah right now. I mean, the incompetence, the stupidity, the devastation of this attack, then all the different ways that Israel is going to be able to mine the aftermath of this attack to pay attention to how Hezbollah tries to get back on its feet, right? Israel will just have a map to Hezbollah forces or make them even easier to locate and track down Hezbollah in the future. So if your side gets into a war, right, you're likely to suffer. And so when Hamas attacked Israel, right, and Hamas was the operating political system and law enforcement system in Gaza, right, that makes all of Gaza, right, a target for Israeli retaliation. So if I wanted to keep my family safe or my people safe, right, by directly going after those who are trying to kill us is the smart moral thing. And yeah, innocent people are going to die and you want to reduce that as much as possible. But everyone's primary concern is just keeping their own safe and protected. And so Hezbollah has been pushing this ongoing war with Israel. Right? Israel didn't launch it. Right? Hezbollah launched it October 8th. And now Hezbollah is rightly paying the price, and those who shelter Hezbollah are going to pay the price. Those who acquiesce to Hezbollah are going to pay the price. That's only right, and that's just how the world works. So there's a great conversation in the book of Genesis where Abraham talks about Sodom. If there are 100 righteous people, don't wipe out the city. Well, if your town, your community, your country gets taken over by dangerous, evil people or forget the moral judgment, just people who are likely to stimulate an attack, all right, you got to get out of there. If you can't overthrow a ruling dangerous regime, then you have to get out of there. Because no people long for this earth is going to just put up with being the recipient of Hezbollah rockets and Hamas terror attacks. So there's a whirlwind coming for Lebanon, just like we saw in Gaza. And as the direct result of Lebanon allowing Hezbollah to send thousands of rockets into Israel for almost a year now. So Lebanon will have to pay the price. It's long been taken for granted that the citizens of a country will share in its fate when your ruling entity goes to war. Right? You're going to share in the fate. And if you don't like that, then you need to leave. You need to move. You need to get out of there. So the Lebanese are sharing in the fate that Hezbollah prepared for them. There's a great saying in the Talmud, if you know someone is coming to kill you, you should get up earlier and kill them first. And any people that want to survive should employ that kind of strategy. You know someone's coming to kill you, and Hezbollah has been firing rockets and driving a war with Israel for almost a year, then of course Israel's going to respond and go after everyone who shelters Hezbollah, not just Hezbollah itself. Right? Citizens will always share the fate of their state and their state's decision to go to war. There are many upstanding Germans who suffered a miserable fate because Germany launched World War I and World War II. Oh, one great sign of the pseudo-intellectual is anyone who talks about the importance of generation. So I've never had any time for analyzing baby boomers versus Generation Z. So Generation Z begins January 1, 1965. And you really think that someone born in 1965 is just dramatically different from someone born in 1964 who's a baby boomer? Or someone who's born in 1980, right? That's the next generational divide. Right, the importance of generations, right? Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomer, right? It's generations are as important as star signs. Right? Generational analysis has as much validity as astrology. And so people like Jonathan Haidt who talk about, unprecedented levels of depression among Gen Z, and it's due to smartphones, and poor Gen Z, they're just passive recipients of technological changes. He reveals himself as a pseudo-intellectual in this regard. No generation is simply passive with regard to its technology, and the primary reason that we had a massive increase in depression findings among young people after 2012 is because Obamacare went into effect with mandated coverage for mental health, which created much more mental health screening, which then created many more diagnoses of depression. So there's a great book on this topic called The Generation Myth. There's a great article in the New Yorker about the nonsense of generational analysis in the New Yorker by Louis Menand, M-E-N-A-N-D. It came out around August of 2021. I read a book on pundits, and it had this great line: when it comes to public intellectuals, the more public, the less intellectual. I've never been able to maintain concentration on people analyzing differences between generations, like Peter Zeihan, right? This is an example of how Peter Zeihan is in some things quite the pseudo-intellectual, right? Because Peter Zeihan puts great weight and makes very confident pronouncements on the significance of generations, and generations like Gen Z, right? That method of categorizing people is as significant as categorizing people on whether they're Gemini or Taurus. So if you don't know much about a topic and you make that clear, then that's the opposite of a pseudo-intellectual. But Peter Zeihan just makes these incredibly confident pronouncements on the significance of the equivalent of star signs. Well, Gen Z is this way. Gen Z doesn't like to interact with other people. They just like to do everything online and over a computer or over a phone. Well, Gen Z has this characteristic and Gen X has this characteristic, right? Just bunk. There's virtually no validity to any of this. Now, a group of people who grow up during a time of material deprivation, right? So you graduate college 2007 to 2012, right, where the economy is on shaky ground, right? You are going to have more material concerns than people who graduate college during times of prosperity. So if there are vastly significant economic differences, then people beginning their careers, all right, they will have different challenges and different concerns. So I noticed that Persian Americans tend to be incredibly materialistic. They love to flash their wealth around. They're often just devoted to making as much money as possible and spending as much money as possible because they come from an atmosphere of tremendous deprivation in Iran. Oh, did you see how the president of the University of Maryland plagiarized like a massive amount? And he did it very carefully and judiciously. He plagiarized from an Australian document. So the affirmative action president of the University of Maryland, right? He plagiarized from an Australian document, but took the care to change all the British forms of the English language into American. So I'm walking around UCLA, and even though you hear about how gender fluid Gen Z is, I almost never see anyone trans. So where are all the trans students of UCLA? This is supposed to be super gen fluid. sexually fluid, Gen Z. I just don't see any signs of this. Right? I don't see more signs of trans on the UCLA campus than off the UCLA campus in West LA. Now, I know, speaking to parents whose kids go to elite private schools or elite public schools on LA's west side, that there is a vast increase in the number of people who are experimenting with homosexuality and with transgenderism, but it doesn't seem to be translating into the higher IQ. Right? It seems to primarily be manifestation of midwits. Right? Obviously, there are some geniuses who are trans, but the vast amount of Gen Z fluid identity trans experimentation, right, doesn't seem to be taking place in the top 5% of IQ levels. And so UCLA students probably overall in about the top 2% of their peers in IQ. This is the top public university in the United States. Oh, here's another media trope that I find ridiculous. And latest one is on the cover of the New York Times right now online. For Tammy Duckworth, in vitro fertilization is personal. So is this a feminine bent in news reporting? For X, subject Y is personal, as though that has some grand significance, right? Donald Trump seems to take everything personally. I don't think that speaks well of him. But often, highly successful people do take things personally. Right? Athletes try to psych themselves up for a competition, and they often do it by taking things very personally, that the other team is disrespecting them, the media is disrespecting them. So a lot of high achievers, I notice this, take things awfully personally because it must help provide them with the energy and motivation to go to extraordinary lengths, and extraordinary efforts are often required for extraordinary levels of success. But usually the wise philosophical person, the bloke with secure identity, someone who's at ease with himself, at ease with other people, at ease with reality, recognizes that nothing is personal. Will certainly feel that way, but usually the more immature you are, the more personally you'll take things. And when I hear people pronounce, oh, for me, this is personal, and the notion that this is then supposed to grab my attention and grab my respect is ridiculous. Right? Just because you take capital gains rates or the safety of Israel or IVF or abortion or trans personally, it says nothing about whether you're right or wrong and whether other people should accord the matter greater significance. We're just evolutionarily developed to care overwhelmingly about ourselves. Right? If we didn't, we wouldn't be here because our ancestors would have died out. And the notion that some stranger taking topic X personally means that I should sit up and pay attention, or that I should be riveted, that Tammy Duckworth takes IVF personally, just seems like a ludicrous media trope. Who cares? Oh, this is rich. So Yale, Princeton, Duke, right? They have significantly declining numbers of Asian enrollments. This is for the new school year, which takes place after last year's significant United States Supreme Court ruling that universities are not allowed to take race into consideration for affirmative action, except apparently with regard to reading an essay about someone's personal life. But now at Yale, Princeton, Duke, right, they have lower numbers of Asian students. Right, they have high numbers of black students, between 9 and 15%. And they're clearly not admitting students according to merit. Because if students were admitted according to test scores, prep test scores, and GPA, right, we'd have far more Asians on elite college campuses. We'd have more white people on elite college campuses, and we'd have fewer members of other groups. If we admitted students to university solely on academic merit, right, certain protected groups that currently occupy 10 to 20% of university admissions would instead occupy about 1%. And so now the Alliance, essentially for fair treatment for Asians, that brought the lawsuit, made it all the way to the US Supreme Court and got that stunning US Supreme Court ruling against race-based affirmative action for university admissions. They are now sending legal notices to Yale, Princeton, and Duke, who stand out for the way that they are obviously ignoring the latest Supreme Court ruling on race-based affirmative action, putting these elite universities on notice that they need to preserve all evidence on a topic that they want to keep very much under wraps, and that is the decisions they use, the criteria they use on whether or not to admit someone. And this is not how it's done all around the world. So usually admissions are done purely on the basis of testing. Just testing excellence decides who gets into universities in England and Australia. And so the elite universities, much of the world, not representative of the population as a whole, because different groups have different gifts. And some groups are much more academically disciplined and gifted. Some groups are more cognitively gifted than other groups, while other groups can run fast, or they can improvise very quickly, have certain athletic skills, acting skills. But overall, they're not cognitively gifted. So if they're admitted to universities purely on the basis of merit, there'd be far fewer. So many conservatives thought this US Supreme Court ruling against race-based affirmative action would just have no effect, because the universities would be so smart they'd figure out ways around it. Well, up for further litigation, which will be incredibly expensive and embarrassing. Where are the protesters, right? It's UCLA. At what temperature does it become gender solid? What about at a high altitude? Gender boils at a high altitude. Yeah, Peter Zion does oversimplify. Strauss and Howe are worth reading on generations. There's no significance to generations any more than there's significance to astrology. Yeah, Peter Zion believes China will collapse within 10 years. I think he's right about that. Kids that grew up with cell phones do seem different than those who did not. In which ways? What state is this? This is California. This is the University of California at Los Angeles. What if they are holding you hostage? Who helps them? What if you can't just get up and leave? What if that's not an option? What if they have the people you love and they just have to share their fate? Then that's very difficult. Yeah, how many Hamas-tards were castrated? They're not going to be able to do as much raping as they hoped. What's the best way to pronounce Hezbollah? Hezbollah. So I was here in the school year 1988 to 89, taking a lot of economics classes. I loved it here. Unfortunately, I was crippled with chronic fatigue syndrome the whole time. But campus doesn't look very different. Now, this is in part because I am not the most visually astute, not the most sharp visual observer, but things look pretty much the same. So I think that's Royce Hall that we're looking at. Yep, that's Royce Hall right now. And you know the All In podcast? Well, they had an All In summit for 3 days last year. I think they charged just under $1,000 for admission. And they had J.D. Vance speak, Peter Thiel spoke, John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs. Had a lot of elites speak at the All In 3-day conference, and then they had dinners where you could match up and sit next to people who shared your interests. So a lot of people there who are going to play important roles in a Trump administration, presumably also a Kamala Harris administration. So a lot of elites apparently listened to the All In podcast and attended this All In summit. About 1,000 people, 2,000 people attended. They had events, speeches all day, networking parties. Elon Musk spoke. Eric Weinstein was there. So you could just cozy up to the bar and talk to Eric Weinstein or a lot of your favorite intellectuals and gurus at the All In podcast. Now, I have not experienced much benefit from listening to the All In podcast. I can't remember anything that I heard in the All In podcast that I haven't heard elsewhere. There's nothing about being a billionaire that makes you a more astute observer of the news, a more gifted prognosticator, a more profound pundit. So I'm glad that many of the blokes on the All In podcast are supporting Donald Trump, and so to the extent that they share my values, I'm happy about that. But can't recall receiving much benefit from the All In podcast. So apparently it's just about the number one general interest podcast. The 3-day summit looked cool. I mean, the podcast sounds cool, but really, is there bang for the buck there? I respect, I'm amazed at many of the things that Elon Musk does, right? So he's the brains behind Tesla and SpaceX, and he bought the platform X, right? So Elon Musk has done amazing things. He's about the richest person in the world. But when he speaks about topics outside of his expertise, he doesn't seem to convey any more wisdom than anyone else, right? He, to my mind, often makes a fool of himself on Twitter, even though I'm generally aligned with the things he says. So I'm glad that he's promoting a new masculinity. I'm glad he's promoting Donald Trump. I'm grateful for the imperfect amount of free speech that he's brought back to the platform of X. I respect his enormous contributions. So I'm not a Richard Spencer who says, oh, Elon Musk is just a con man. So I know a lot of people have that attitude towards Elon Musk. He's just a con man. And he sounds like a con man at times, right? The reason that many people think Elon Musk is a con man is because he speaks like a con man and he tweets like a con man. He sounds demented frequently. But people can be demented and irrational and unwise and unhinged in some parts of their life. And it's just part of an overall package, how they get the energy and the strength to do the important things, to make their contributions to society, right? We're often driven by not the most upstanding motivations. And often the energy and the strength, the motivation that we require is accelerated and enhanced and lit up by doing things that aren't very nice, that aren't very respectable, that on their own you wouldn't praise this type of speech or tweet or behavior. But you have to take people as a whole package. So the whole package, Elon Musk is definitely making the world a better place. And he often says profound things, but he often says stupid things and ridiculous things and egotistical things and exaggerates his own contributions to Tesla and his own innovations, when really often it was a team that was getting things done and he was just the titular head. So who was behind Elon Musk taking over X? Like, who gave him that idea and who promoted it? Was it David Sachs? I mean, I'm thrilled that it happened. Right? I'm thrilled that David Sachs spoke at the Republican convention. So I feel myself broadly aligned with the worldview of David Sachs. But many of the things that he says are just ridiculous. Right? He must have had some successes, right? He probably got a great feeling of excitement and motivation from inspiring and directing and assisting Elon Musk to take over the platform X. And then it goes to his head and he says some ridiculous, unthought through, unwise, unadvantageous, against his own self-interest remarks on X. So there's discourse about your brain on alcohol, your brain on crystal meth, your brain on cocaine, your brain on heroin. But your brain on success, it changes. Right? Your brain on a compelling vision changes. Right? Your brain on love changes. Your brain on connection changes. Your brain changes when you get some lucky breaks. And you spot people in all of these situations who then say ridiculous things that are completely against their self-interest. So just because you make some wise stock trades, just because you do some smart business deals, just because you make connections with people who are even more powerful than you, that does not mean that your observation about America or China or American politics is more likely than not to be wise. It's not. And so I like David Sachs. I like his direction. I'm grateful for the things that he's done. I feel like we're on the same team. And I feel the same way about Mike Benz. Right? I generally share Mike Benz's politics. I like the upside of his activism. I'm impressed by how effective he is. I'm impressed by how effective David Sachs has been with enlisting Elon Musk and parts of Silicon Valley behind Donald Trump. Right? So I'm grateful. But at the same time, I can stand back and note that many of their pronouncements are ridiculous and ludicrous and completely against their self-interest and diminishes their credibility with people who aren't already on board with their vision. So people get carried away by their success. Man, your brain on success, if you're not grounded, can lead to making a lot of ill-advised tweets. Bill Ackman, right? Bill Ackman is a powerful, successful man. But while I generally have great sympathy for his worldview and for his activism, I appreciate his attempt to take down a scam like Herbalife. I think Bill Ackman is often fighting the good fight. But just because you're fighting the good fight doesn't mean that next tweet is going to be well advised. And Bill Ackman makes a lot of ridiculous tweets and ridiculous claims. This is Elon Musk and David Sachs and much of the all-in crowd. And I'm not even talking here about the total charlatans of Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein and Joe Rogan. Yeah, looking at my notes here. So you're wondering, 40, how did you string together such an amazing live stream with so many profound, incisive thoughts? I made notes, mate. I made notes, and I'm inspired walking around UCLA. Such a clean, beautiful campus, right? Not much crime around here, not much trash. There's no sense of threat. Oh my God, completely different to the University of Chicago. Did you see that tweet from that Jewish kid? I think his name was something like David Schmidt. We talked about a young girl had a gun put to her head at 3 p.m. on the University of Chicago campus because there are so many thugs that are infiltrating the campus, and how various left-wing activists and Black Lives Matter activists try to incentivize people not to report crime so that the people who are carrying out these crimes, right, don't get arrested. And so every school year you have all these University of Chicago students who get mugged and threatened, held up at knife point or gunpoint on the University of Chicago campus. My God, what a nightmare. And this is in large part because of woke culture that says that certain groups must be publicly held off limits from criticism, such as African Americans, gays, trans, other sacred minority groups should be held off limits from criticism. And if you can't name people who are engaging in antisocial behavior, right, it makes it more difficult for the law enforcement and for administrations to crack down on problems. My God, University of Chicago, what a nightmare. And it used to be a safe campus. Chicago, of course, has astronomical crime rates, but the University of Chicago used to be a safe campus, right? It's turned into a crime-ridden, dangerous place just to walk around campus. That's new, right? That's one of the gifts of Black Lives Matter. I love a good fountain. We love our fountains, don't we, folks? Such a peaceful, restful, safe, clean place. I used to boil my dogs. Luke Ford is getting those steps in. All In podcast, never heard of it. It's a bunch of billionaires. Right. I need to go back to the well and get some new material for a new stream. Bless.